Welcome to another episode of Clinic Success Secrets, the podcast where we uncover the strategies and insights that drive clinic growth and elevate patient care. I'm your host, Tomás O'Dwyer, founder of Clinic Success Partners, a medical digital marketing agency dedicated to helping clinics serve more patients and achieve the success that they deserve. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dayana Romero, a registered psychotherapist and the owner of RD Psychotherapy and RD Medical Spa. Dayana runs a holistic healthcare practice that integrates psychotherapy and medical spa services, emphasizing the crucial mind-body connection. With over 16 years of experience in the field, Dayana has successfully built a practice that prioritizes patient care, and she's here to share her insights on creating a thriving healthcare business. That being said, Dayana, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Tomás, and welcome to Canada.
Welcome back. As I said, I used to live there, so I love it. With that being said, Dayana, before we get into the weeds of the marketing, the business, mindset, and all that fun stuff, would you mind sharing a bit about your journey to becoming initially a registered psychotherapist and what motivated you to establish RD Psychotherapy?
So originally, what made me become interested in healthcare in general was, so I'm originally from New York City, and my father was a professor in one of the universities in New York City. And I could have been about 4 or 5 years old, and my father had taken me to work that day, and I saw a bunch of medical students doing stuff. And I was like, oh, what are they doing? And my father explained to me what healthcare was. So then as I was growing up, I knew that I wanted to go into healthcare, but the realm of healthcare is massive. And then when I was growing up, I actually grew up in a religious background. And then dealing with the religious community, I realized that there was a lot of, information and counseling given, but in many times not in the proper way, simply because psychology and religion, while they can work together, but you got to know what you're talking about. And many times people tend to dispense religious information. And you ever heard that old saying, good intentions pave the road to hell? So in a
Yeah,
good intention, but it didn't benefit the person. So growing up, I said, oh, I would like to do psychiatry because I realized there was a lot of mental health issues and emotional issues that had the person had proper counseling could have definitely helped. But then when I realized in order to do psychiatry, you still have to do a bunch of rotations in regular medicine, I was like, nope, we're not going to do that. So I just cut off the medical part and just went in still into the psychotherapy part. And eventually I came to Canada and I studied here and, 3 degrees, many years later, I became a psychotherapist.
nice. And then I suppose when it came to starting that practice again, obviously, you've had the beautiful journey of meeting your husband. There's a whole synergy, sort of a yin and yang dynamic going on there, which I'd love to hear more about. Um, but even before that, when starting that independent practice in Hamilton, what challenges did you face and how did you come about overcoming them?
So originally, and that's a really actually really good question because originally I had started the practice in Toronto, Ontario,
Mm,
because when I had graduated, I still needed to be under supervision. It's no different than when I'm not sure out in Ireland, but here in Canada, when you graduate, for example, in medicine, you become a resident and you are
yeah.
under a restrictive license until you are done your residency. Then you can, the world's your oyster, right? So it goes the same when you're looking to be a psychotherapist. You can graduate, but you still need a supervisor. So I worked at the medical clinic for person-centered psychotherapy for about 5 years. And everyone there was a medical doctor who practiced GP psychotherapy or psychiatry. So at the end of the day, I still ended up getting trained, by medical doctors from a medical realm without actually doing medicine. So it was actually pretty cool. But then I eventually got married and then I ended up moving and it was a 2 hour just to get, from door to door. So that was 4 hours in traveling. So instead, I decided, okay, you know what? I'm just going to establish the practice in Hamilton. And that was a little difficult because, with the exception of one patient, all the rest of them stood in Toronto. I still have one that he will still drive up the 2 hours, once every so often to just come see me. And he's been seeing me since I was in my 20s and I'm in my 40s now, right? So I ended up establishing it there in Hamilton. And the main thing that was difficult was, starting from ground zero all over again, because that was 2009 and now I came here in 2018. So it was just, giving up everything there and reestablishing everything in Hamilton. And so it ended up being that, and you asked the question about my husband, was that when I restarted everything here, it took me 3 months to actually get myself to full time. Because again, that goes back down, which we'll talk about in a bit, marketing, 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 right? No
Hmm.
one knows you exist if people don't actually know you exist. So it just so happened that my husband ended up applying to the practice because he needed an internship. So he applied to the practice, he got interviewed, and he got the position. Now, at that time, I was also working with another GP psychotherapist. So we worked together, but we were independent practices, if that makes sense. And so he
Hmm.
also liked them, and I liked him, and so he got hired. When Richard finished his internship and he was done, that's when he came and said, "Oh, guess what? I like you." And then that's where the relationship started from. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, I mean, depending on how much you want to go into that side of things, I mean, it is definitely an interesting and educational wouldn't be the word, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned in how you manage that dynamic. Obviously, between the starting the second business and we've talked about this before in previous conversations, the importance of doubling down on what you're naturally adapted at I think is much more important. You should know what your weaknesses are, in the short term, but very, very often I find, and it's consistent feedback that I see from others as well, is acknowledge your weaknesses, but especially as an entrepreneur, uh, maybe instead of trying to fix those, like, you should try and fix them to whatever you can, but double down on the strengths. And then if you find somebody else who has a complementary skill set or personality type, um, you get that yin and yang synergy, like I mentioned. With that on that topic, then, what unique skill sets or character traits did your husband bring to the business from his own background?
So my husband is from the military, right? And so when he was done his internship and he wanted to stay at the practice, he basically came up to me and said, "Look, either make me a business partner or I'll just buy you out." I mean, that was, I will never forget that meeting. He
So
said, "I want to have
romantic.
a meeting." And at this point, I was like, okay, wow, that was more voluntold, right? And so he comes from the military and he was in the military for 8 years. Unfortunately, he suffered a traumatic brain injury. And so he was medically released. And when he came out, he was like, okay, what do I do now? He was prior to that already in school for psychology. So he decided, you know what, I'm just going to continue, and he continued to study to becoming a psychotherapist. So him coming from the military, if you've ever met anyone from the military, they're very regiment, they're very disciplined, they're very, to the point. So he had this great idea of, I think I can definitely help you with this, because since I've been in charge of people, I can help you in how we'll separate this. I'll deal with the individuals and the infrastructure, and you can deal with the clinical aspect, because I have had many interns at that point. So understanding the clinical aspect was a big part of me, but also I have been in the business for so many years at that point, that when it comes to looking at things from the clinical side and as well as from the legal side, I was able to capture that way better than him. But he was able to capture way better on how exactly to deal with people and deal with conflict and deal with growing a business, because his father is actually an extremely successful man. So he'll always credit that to his father. Everything he learned about business, he learned from his very successful father.
That's amazing. And then with regards to, we've talked about this before, apart from we've talked about plenty of things, not only as the Irish
Yes.
influence that you've had, the tradition of making Irish sponge cake and so
And
on.
learning how to Irish step dance.
The most for anyone listening, if you want to start a medical clinic, the number one skill that you can develop is Irish step dancing.
$100.
The mind body connection, the coordination really helps with patient retention. You definitely
100%. Have you
stand
ever
out.
tried Irish step dancing?
Uh, Personally, for me, no, but I've had siblings that they compete in the worlds, but separate conversation. But yeah, for any clinic owners, if you want to stand out from your competitors, bust out a jig, and you'll they'll
100%.
remember you. So that's a business hack from Dayana Romero on the record. Uh, um, with regards to, the process of building the second business. So you obviously have your medical spa services and your psychotherapy services. What inspired you to create that balance, to integrate those two businesses together? And yeah, would you mind telling me a bit about the logic or inspiration for that?
For sure. So you know what actually built it was my husband's brain injury. So when he had the brain injury, so he was left with a traumatic brain injury where he was left in a coma for 2 weeks, right? They didn't expect him to make it, but he woke up and he had to learn on how to redo, everything all over again, right? And one of the things he said that really was frustrating for him is that on Monday he had to go to physiotherapy at one place. On Tuesday he had to go see the psychologist at another place. Wednesday, the neuro, Thursday, the occupational therapist, Friday, like it was just this overwhelming sense of every day you were at some new place. And so he always imagined that if he would put a holistic center together, it would look like what he calls it is a medical Walmart. Now, I don't know if y'all have Walmarts out in Ireland, but Walmart basically is a store where you walk in and if they don't have it, you don't need it, basically, because they have
Mm,
everything you could possibly think of. You can go to electronics, you can go to, home stuff, you can go to bathroom stuff. I mean, you can even buy, I think in some Walmarts, yeah, furniture if you want. So everything is a one-stop shop. The one where we're at, you can buy groceries in there as well. So everything is possible. So he envisioned always putting together a medical Walmart where, as an individual, you can get the services that you need in one place instead of constantly being all over. And that, with his then, upbringing and learning about business from his father and coming from the military, he was really the mastermind on how to put all that together.
I love that. And that's a Turan, we were actually doing a podcast yesterday with a fellow Canadian person, Ben Holton from Ion Performance and Health, and he's doing something very similar, but more so with chiropractors, acupuncture, and physio, and similar framework. The whole idea of having that holistic, approach to everything, and I think that with our own clients and with the most successful people that I see in healthcare at the minute, they are really starting to see that connection, like you said, much like what we do at Clinic Success Partners. Instead of trying to view everything as a siloed department, you really, really need to take that top-down approach and be like, okay, what is, the business that we're trying to help? And in your case, what is, the patient that I'm looking to help? What do they really, really need? And
Yeah.
let's create a solution based on that. I think the Ben, our client, our podcast guest, literally yesterday said something that was great, which was we offer solutions, not services. And I think that was very profound. I think it's very aligned with how you run your business.
Exactly. And I will agree with what Ben said, because when you are in healthcare, it isn't about the service. We're not doing your hair, we're not painting your nails, we're not helping you buy real estate. Again, all of that stuff is amazing, but that's not what the person is coming from. The person is coming because something is wrong in their body and they're trying to figure out what it is because they want a solution for it, because they want to
Mm,
get better, right? A service in itself, and if you look at healthcare, and I think you and I discussed this before, there's a big difference between preventative measures and reparative measures, right? Preventative measures
mm,
are your GP. You go to your GP, you get your annual checkup, your GP tells you what you need to do in order to keep yourself, in proper health. Reparative measures are, as an example, I have a friend who's a cardiovascular surgeon. He one day told me, I am basically palliative care, because if I don't do something for you, by the time you get to me, if I don't do something for you, that means you are going to die. You're here because something's wrong with your heart. And if I can't fix it, then what's the solution? There isn't. You die, right? So
mm,
he was the one that said that to me. Always remember, you have to have preventative measures before you get to reparative, because at reparative, that's when we are at trying our best to find solutions that could have been found from the start had we just done what was told, right? So that is why the big difference between services. A service isn't so much to find you a solution, it's more just to give you a service of what you're looking for, versus healthcare it is the solution that you need for whatever it is going on that cannot, at this moment, you have not been able to find on your own. And that's why I like holistic measures, because it looks at the body in whole. The body doesn't just break down in one part, it'll start to show many facets along the way. And that's why if you can find a solution, you can plug up those holes.
I think I'm not sure if we mentioned this on a previous conversation, but there's an anecdote that I think of very often. A close friend of mine, Robbie Cassidy, he's a physiotherapist, and pause me if I have said this before, but for anyone listening, he's similar framework to yourself, but through the lens of physiotherapy. And he would always talk to me about the mind-body connection. And I remember we did an episode probably 2 years ago. And I remember him telling me he had a client, for example, a woman with chronic back pain for 20 plus years. And she came to him and said, Robbie, my back's killing me. And he said, out of curiosity, is there a particular time that it tends to flare up? It was always the afternoon. Now, for most people listening here, you probably know most people are working in the afternoon. So the next question Robbie asked, and this is as a physiotherapist, said, how is work? And it turned into an actual, effectively a psychotherapy session. And turns out he was getting a bit of pressure from, she had this toxic office environment, and she wasn't getting a lot of satisfaction. So her body was very reactive and full of cortisol. So his solution was journaling for 15 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes of dancing. Within 2 weeks, her back pain was gone. So it just, for me, that was an interesting anecdote of, your body doesn't know the difference between imaginary, mental stress and physical stress. So I think it's really, really very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on the importance of the mind-body connection with regards to how you practice your treatment philosophy?
So, my husband gave an analogy once, which is very similar to his, where he talked about anxiety, right? So we all know what anxiety is. To the core, anxiety is a fear-based disorder, and it plays on your biggest fears. But the amazing thing about anxiety is that if you are having a panic attack, the body can't tell if you're running from a bear or if you're running on a treadmill. All it knows is that your cortisol levels are going up, your adrenaline is going up, everything is going up. The difference is if you're running on a treadmill, that's going to help with cardiovascular issues. If you're running from a bear, fear is kicking in. And the more you keep constantly in a state of fear, the more you are dousing your body with these hormones and these elevated levels that eventually start to cause harm and cause a breakdown, right? That's why if you look at patients who have a lot of anxiety, they eventually do develop cardiovascular issues. Because again, the body knows that it's doing something, but it just can't tell the difference whether it's from a bear or on a treadmill. All it knows is that it believes it's running, but from what? And that's where exactly what your friend was able to identify. This individual's body was taking in that stress, and it was presenting itself, in the form of back pain. But again, back pain doesn't just originate out of nowhere. Like I always tell people, no one wakes up angry. No one just wakes up sad. No one just wakes up like anything. There are contributing factors. And if we can't identify those contributing factors, then all we're doing is, again, now we're providing there a service. Your head hurts, take a Tylenol, go home. An actual GP will say, okay, when did this start? What are the contributing factors? Just that. Is this always at work? Generally, when I hear my patients tell me, Monday to Friday, I'm constantly stressed, but Saturday and Sunday, my life is great. Well, automatically, I'm like, you hate your job, don't you? Yeah. What makes you say that? Oh, I don't know. Just that you're there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Right. And then and then if you again start digging, you start breaking down. It's not just there. Then if you ask them, well, what about your home life? Well, if you're in a toxic environment from 9 to 5 every day, how do you think you're going to show up when you get home? Very few people have the ability to compartmentalize that and say, I hate my job all day, but when I get home, I'm just peachy keen and everybody loves me. Right. So all of it is connected.
And what are some other symptoms? I suppose, again, this is sort of it's obviously business, but also personal. It's interesting because there are a lot of people here that might be running clinics that may be more sort of aesthetics focused and things like that. So this sort of information is genuinely, it's fascinating to the wider population. In your clinical experience, what are some other symptoms that you see with people that may be chronically stressed and so on? from work and so on? How does that tend to affect their personal lives and health?
So in many situations, right, if you see an individual that's chronically stressed from work, you're also potentially going to see depression and anxiety. That's to me is not uncommon when I see it. And then you're going to see then poor eating habits or poor health or lack of motivation to even get out and simply do things. There's one particular psychiatrist who I work with. I love that this man to death. He is so amazing, Dr. Ola. And Dr. Ola, one of the things he always tells patients is being in your basement all day will not help your situation. So once a day for at least an hour, go outside and take a walk. Let the sun hit
Mm.
your face, get your body moving, breathe in that air, because that just alone sometimes is enough to just, it's not going to cure the patient's depression overnight, but it is going to allow you a change of scenery, but it is also going to allow your body to move and just, get your body out of the, I'm just stuck here in this darkness to let me just go out and let me just feel a little different. Just, he actually even tells them, and once you start doing that, start incorporating, at least even if it's just 30 minutes of exercise, some way, shape, or form, because it does, and exercise has proven time and time again to help with mental health.
I love that. I was actually, it's hearing you say that. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Ryan, literally yesterday. And he says something profound that I think very closely mirrors what you're saying. And that was, we were talking about I've been tracking my metrics with a
Yeah.
Whoop band, and I've been working a lot, and my heart rate variability was lower because increased workload and all that. And, we were saying just the importance of sleep. And obviously, less sleep, reduced capacity to deal with stress, higher cortisol levels, and so on. And he said something that was very simplistic but oddly profound. And that was, you can't outthink your endocrine system. Like you can do all the meditation, you can read all the self-help, but you can do all your journaling, but if fundamentally you're not addressing the physical components, again, it's that inverse of what we talked about with the physiotherapy example. You're fighting a losing battle. Like they're one and the same. It's just a very interesting and obvious statement to hear said out loud.
Yep, there's an old saying that you can hide the sun with your hand. And that's exactly what people try to do, right? When you look at it from what your friend just said, you can do whatever you want, but if you're not paying attention to your body, eventually your body will just take revenge on you. As an example, lack of sleep, and a lot of people don't know, if you're constantly going in a lack of sleep and a lack of sleep, that actually causes brain swelling. That's why we have to sleep in the night to bring all of that down. But they have found
Mm.
studies when they sleep deprive people that eventually your brain starts to swell. And that's where, I mean, have you ever been sleep deprived? I have. Now
So
have you ever been
if
have
you
you ever
talk
been
to
more
anyone
than
that knows
20
me, yeah,
you ever been more than 24 hours sleep deprived?
yeah.
Okay, so growing up, I did that a lot. We call it breaking night. I've done it so many times when I was young, and it got to the point where reasoning it was hard to reason, to understand what was
Hmm.
happening, to understand what was being said, because that's when at that point your brain starts to swell. All these things start to shut down, and this is why sleep is so important. And there are so many doctors now telling people, for what it's worth, you need to get sleep. Prioritize sleep over anything and everything, because a large portion of my patients who have mental health issues, when I ask them, what's your sleep like? The next question is, what sleep? I'm like, okay, here we go. But what we found when we were able to stabilize them and teach them proper sleep hygiene, simple things like get your phone out of your room. I don't even, my husband and I do not have a television at all in our bedroom, and we never have. And even I think growing up, we never either, simply because just that alone and the little lights that it emits and the blue lights and everything can be very disruptive to your sleep, which then starts to affect your mental health if you're not sleeping. So I even have in my room, I think we have blackout curtains because I need it to be black. So that way nothing disturbs me. And that's highly
Mm.
important for mental health. Your lack of sleep will affect your mental health. I don't care what anybody tells me, studies have shown it, and I can see it in my patients when they walk in and say, yeah, I haven't slept last night. And that session is fun because they're in a
I'd
bad
say
mood
so.
and
Yeah,
everything starts to come out. Yeah.
yeah.
So your friend's
Um,
right.
I'm gonna have to cut that out in case he hears it, because otherwise I'll be getting a lot of "I told you so." But uh, with regards to that, so you're obviously on the cutting edge of all these studies and all that. And I really want to dive deep into number one, you're furthering uh fleshing out your philosophy, but also talking about your marketing and your business operations. But before we talk about what's working on the marketing side of things, what are some trends that you see emerging in the holistic healthcare space, and how can other clinic owners adapt?
So basically, the holistic approach by offering more than one service, just not in mental health, but as well as in physical health. I'm noticing here, because we're established in Hamilton, Ontario, there are other clinics who are looking to, let's say you have a chiropractor and they're looking to add a psychotherapist because they realize, I think you and I discussed, you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? So
Literally have it on frame.
I have it right here too.
Yeah.
So I know many chiropractors who I actually have one who's a really good friend. He refers, yeah, there you go. He refers clients over to me all the time because he'll tell them like, yeah, you have a lot of stress and back problems, but because you have issues that you need to deal with, and until you don't, then basically you could keep coming here, but it's not going to get you any better. And so they've even seen, the connection. And no different than me, I have had patients that I refer over to, the naturopathic doctor, to the chiropractor, to all these people that we work with to say, hey, like this individual, this is much deeper than just psychological. This has now gone into the physical realm. So in the marketing aspect, we really try to push and look at it from a holistic level, offering all these services, because a lot of clinics are now doing this because they're realizing just how important and how connected everything really is. The mind is not separate from the body, and the body's not separate from the mind. Obviously, you and I
Yeah.
both have our heads attached to us.
Yeah. This is true. Um, so again, circling back to the marketing, you touched on it. Uh, Obviously, what's particularly interesting and impressive about your story is, as I said, the fact that you started off with one specific vertical, which was the psychotherapy side of things, and then you branched out. And then you obviously combined that, like I said, with working with your husband. It's a very multifaceted, um, you know, life that you basically created
Yeah.
for yourself, which is keeps it interesting. But I can imagine, again, on the topic of mental, work stress, mental health, and all that. How do you personally divide that responsibility, between yourself and your husband, and what operational strategies work best for you for your practice?
So, as I said earlier, right, we divide it where he works in the infrastructure and the business aspect and dealing with the practitioners, and I deal with the clinical aspect. So, if there's, patient issues, patient care on how to deal with certain things, even from a legal aspect, because being a healthcare provider, we have a license, and that license is still governed by, the province of Ontario. We just can't do whatever we want. There are still rules and regulations, right? So my job is to deal with the practitioner from that particular level, but also deal with any clinical issues that the practitioner may have with the patient. That doesn't mean it's a complaint. It's just, so every Friday we have rounds. So, the practitioners come and say, okay, I'm seeing, let's say Tomas for, X, Y, and Z, and he's been doing well. However, we've hit a bump, and so I'm not sure on how we progress through here. Does anybody have any possible ideas or suggestions that I may have missed, that I have not considered? And you bring that case there. No different if you've ever seen any medical show where all the doctors are doing their rounds and saying, here's what this patient is at, here's the possible concern. That's exactly what we do as well. So I deal with that, and he deals with the business part of it.
Nice, I love that. The perfect balance of personality types and skill sets.
Exactly.
With regards to then getting the new clients or patients, this is the juicy stuff for anyone listening. So number one, your first bit of advice is learn how to Irish dance. For anyone listening, the second bit is
While eating Irish sponge cake.
and a pint of Guinness in one hand. It's good for iron. What what marketing methods have proven most effective for you guys for attracting new patients to your clinic?
Website that has Google AdWords attached to it with a proper SEO. I cannot stress that enough to new practitioners in any field. Because a lot of people believe that by a wing or a prayer, people will just find you. It doesn't work that way. I know back in the 1950s and the early 1900s, before all of this existed, we all used to be found by word of mouth and advertisements people put in the newspaper and something called the yellow pages and things like that, right? Those
Mm,
things are not have shown, even through research that has been done, are no longer really as prominent or successful as a website is. Don't get me wrong, word of mouth will always be your one thing, right? Because if you're a crappy practitioner, trust me, that will get around and no one will trust you. So the biggest thing I have found is website, website, website. If you don't have a website, it makes it, and I saw a study on this once. They found that you also get judged by your website. So if you have a crappy looking website, the first thing people look at it and go, wow, this is Tomas' website? Like, is this guy really good? Is he really in business? Is this a real website? Because now, we also judge everything based on Google reviews. I know I
mm.
won't go to a restaurant if they don't have Google reviews because I don't know what I'm looking at right now. With that being said, Google reviews aren't always completely accurate. But we know more or less if you have 100 reviews and they all weren't on the same day, but they have been, throughout the years, and you have a 4.5 and maybe a few bad ones, that that's legit. So it comes down to Google AdWords, SEOs, and that website. That I cannot stress enough to people. And for the practitioners that I know that don't have a website are nowhere next to doing as well as they would like to. And I get to the point where I tell them, well, I've already told you what to do. If you don't trust me, go ask someone else who does has a website that they can tell you the same information.
And I would 100% agree, I suppose, with what you're saying there, first of all. And we might have mentioned this before. I say this all the time in my consultation calls with our digital marketing clients that there, for anyone listening, there are four levers that we can pull to grow any business. And that is traffic, any type of business. And that's traffic, conversion, price, and churn. And that doesn't matter if it's brick and mortar or an online business. But traffic basically is how many people see you. And as you mentioned, Dana, having a great website, it's amazing. It's like a digital billboard.
Mhm.
I literally ran a webinar for anyone listening as well. Feel free to reach out. I can send that webinar over about how to actually curate and create a website that's built to convert, specifically if you run a medical clinic. But having that website there that really explains the brand, explains exactly what you do, who the people you help are, and making it very easy for people to get in contact. Um, book those appointments is so powerful. One thing I would say is if you're a clinic owner and you are listening to this, very often the fastest way of you doubling your return on your investment for your digital marketing is to double the percentage of people that arrive on the website and actually take action.
Oh, yes.
It's an incredibly obvious statement, but there are two ways we can double the amount of business basically our website makes. And that's double the amount of visitors, which can be expensive, worthwhile, but expensive, or double the amount of people that arrive on the website and actually take that action. So definitely 100% agree. I think depending on your niche, Google Ads, amazing, especially for psychotherapy. If you're running an aesthetics practice, we often find that a blend of meta ads, so social media ads, can work a bit better. SEO is evergreen, as you said. Get those reviews. It's always going to pay off. Nobody has ever bought something on Amazon because it has the fewest amount of reviews. I'll put it that way. Um, so that's just a few notes on that. I completely agree. With the Google Ads side of things, do you have any insights on what has worked well for you? You don't need to give away everything, but what has been effective for you guys on the Google Ads side of things?
So we have our marketing person and Danny, and she does all of this stuff, right? And one of the things that Danny is, she's a whiz. I actually, the other one of my friends who have their own clinics or lawyers or whatever are always trying to get a hold of her because they're always trying to steal her over. I'm like, no. But if you met Danny, you would be, astonished by how much knowledge she has. And so Danny basically has a program, and forgive me, I don't know the name of it, where she'll run, okay, psychotherapy, what are the keywords that are being looked at in Hamilton, Ontario? She will run that first, she'll come back with the words, and she'll say, do any of these words apply to you? Yes, these, yes, don't. Then those are the ones she uses for Google Ads and for SEOs. Then for Google Ads, she will then make ads based around that wording, and then based around the wording that also, because again, being licensed, you can't say things like, go see Dayana, best therapist. We're not allowed to say that because that's a false statement, right? As much as I may think I'm amazing, that is again a bias, thought, right? And that doesn't actually prove anything either. So she has to make sure that the wording meets the licensing board standard, but then also what wording, once it does, the words you can use to actually have people, when they're Googling, that click come up, and then they click on it, and then that ad speaks to them. So there's a lot of, not just, marketing behind it, but also the psychology of what brings people in. That's why we have in school the marketing of psychology. Because if you understand why you bought that shirt that you have, then I understand as the maker of that shirt, what will bring you back again. I think I told you, Paul Mitchell once said, it's not about the sale, it's about the resale. Everybody will buy everything once. Whether they'll come back again for it, that's where the true sale comes in. So every patient I've ever seen, I've always seen at least once. Whether they come back again, that's where the true test of time comes in. And obviously, I have tons that, 90% of them always come back.
Again, as I said, those four levers: traffic, conversion, and you just touched the third one, which is churn. Having that consistent recurring customer for any business owner, within the ethics side of things, depending on what you're doing. It's the easiest customer to sell to is somebody who's already your customer. And again, for anyone listening, on topic of psychology and persuasion, there's a great book here, Influence by Robert Cialdini. Very good book. We actually had another interview about 3 weeks ago with the head of their training institute. That's going to be launched as a masterclass for psychology, specifically for clinic owners. So completely on the same page with everything there, Dayana. So circling back to your advice for new practitioners, what are some key factors that you think new practitioners should focus on when building out their new clinics, and maybe even building out a personal brand?
So when I was under supervision, I had this one supervisor, Dr. Heather White. Now, Dr. White was probably in her 70s or 80s, so she didn't have a website and she didn't have all of that. But she was super successful though. Everything was by word of mouth, and she was super successful because she taught me 4 things that to this day I teach all my interns, and I tell them, if you follow this, you will do well. Like, I'm a living proof of it, and so are others that I have taught it. So the first thing she taught me was, number one, you need to have a good personality, because if no one likes you, no one's coming back to you. She said, real simple. Her exact words were, if you have a shitty personality, no one's coming back. She's like, so keep it in mind. I was like, yes, Dr. White. Number two, she said, you need to have a good marketing plan. If you have no marketing plan, you have nothing. She's the one, that taught me if you're an actor, but no one's ever seen a movie then are you really famous? Right? Then what are you at that point? So her thing was, have a good marketing plan and make sure you know who you're marketing to, because if you market to everybody, then the odds are everybody has also seen everybody else. If you can understand what your niche is, then that's the target audience you're going for, because not everybody is looking to buy that white shirt you have on, but there's a large portion of people that are, and those are the people that you want. You don't want everybody. You want the ones that are actually gonna, make the sale for you. The third thing she taught me is you need to know your craft. You need to actually know as a therapist what you are talking about. There's a rule in medicine in as well as in psychotherapy that if you find a practitioner that does everything, run, don't walk, run away, because that old saying, a jack of many trades, but yet you master none. That's dangerous, because then you have a practitioner who's saying, I can do everything. How? How in the world did you find time to learn about everything? So she said, know your niche, know your craft, and study it well, because if you don't, patients will call you out and they will see right through you when they realize it's just a bunch of BS and you don't really know what you're talking about. And lastly, the fourth thing she told me was, know your laws and know your college laws, because if you know that, that will dictate to you what you can and cannot do, and that will keep you out of trouble. Hence marketing, right? There's a lot of people that put things up on marketing that the college catches, and they'll send you a message and saying, you cannot say this, you have just violated the bylaws, you need to fix this right away. So imagine you just spent $1,000 of that campaign only to have to take it down, fix all that wording, and now have to put it back up. Now you're having to pay. Let's say if that was us, I would have to pay Danny all over again to rebuild this whole campaign or change images or change wording and then have to relaunch it. And now that it's gone down, all those people that could have seen a proper ad don't see it now, and another clinic takes that lead. So those are the 4 things she taught me that to this day I live by.
I love that. I mean, it's such great evergreen advice as well for anybody in any industry, which is what I love about it. You mentioned niches, and again, there's the saying, the riches are in the niches, or I think that's the only way. You can't really say riches are in the niches. You get the idea.
Yes.
How would, in your own words, a clinic owner go about creating that niche specialization that sets them apart from in a competitive market?
So, okay, so for example, my niche, even though I do see individuals with depression and anxiety, my niche is couples. So I do
Yeah.
couples therapy, premarital, counseling, um, you know, uh, sex therapy, and dating coach as an example, right? So my niche is in the relationship realm. So knowing that that's what I wanted to do, I made sure to focus my studies on that. And then I also made sure to focus my marketing. And again, using Danny, because if I knew it all, I'd be able to do it all, right? So we hired Danny, and then I told Danny, here's the niche, here's what we're looking for. So she went out and found those keywords and then marketed to the audience that was looking for a couples therapist. But in order to figure your niche out, you have to kind of sit down and see yourself, okay, if this is the only job I ever do for the rest of my life, can I see myself dealing with, in my case, couples for the rest of my life? The answer is yes. That's why I didn't go into children's therapy, as much as children are great, but I knew that's not something I'd want to do or ever want to do forever. So niches generally come out of an interest that you have in something that you feel that you can develop. But key thing is you have to educate yourself then on that field so that you say, yes, I have all this training, I have this proper platform, versus somebody who just ticks off, yes, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And then when you go to them, they don't have anything more than the simple degree that they got from school, which, don't get me wrong, we all had it. But a degree from school is only a platform. It's not the walls that you're going to build everything else on. That comes from the extra training and schooling that you take after. And our licensing board tells us that you need to continue after. That's what we're required every year to do X number of hours in extra training on top of our degrees that we already have.
I love that. Such good advice. Then in terms, I suppose, of patient trust, you mentioned obviously retaining people through, something I always say, like, everything in life boils down to the quality of our relationships. I've said this to you before, both with ourselves and with others. With that being said, from a patient relationship standpoint, what do you believe is the most critical aspect of developing patient trust and loyalty?
So, and I think I said to you when we talked once, people don't care about how much you know, they just need to know how much you care. And so the main thing with patients, in order to build that trust that they want to come back to you, is, again, we're not providing a service, like you said, we're providing a solution. But before I can even allow this patient to believe that anything I'm saying is even valuable, I have to first gain their trust. And so the main thing is, when I go in to deal with an individual for the first time, I make sure that they get 2 things out of me, which is what, and I'll explain this one, because I always said human beings need 2 things: to be heard and to be loved, right? Obviously, I don't love my patients, but I let them know in the way that I speak to them, in the way that I can empathize with them, that I do care about their situation and they're not simply here just to fill my bank account. Because if you go into healthcare simply looking at the dollar figure, yeah, for sure, you'll make a lot of money. But will you actually transform a lot of lives? That's a whole different story. And again, Google reviews are great for people putting up, this practitioner, all they care about is money. They really didn't listen to me. They didn't look after my, my needs or my wants. So I make sure that they feel heard, but that they also feel that I care about what's happening to them and that I'm trying to provide them the best solutions for their problems.
I love that. And do you have any actionable steps about how practitioners, and actually, let me rewind that question to a point that was made on a previous podcast, which was especially in health, with healthcare and with any other space, it's so easy to become jaded or I suppose disenchanted and prioritize the wrong metrics for success. We had this conversation, like I said, with fellow Canadian Ben from Ion Health and Performance, and he came from an athletic background, and he said very often, athletes would come to him, they'd be looking to get a new bench press, and he'd roll back and say, "But why do you want that?" And they'll say, "Oh, well, I want to get better at a sport." Let's focus on that, not an arbitrary vanity metric.
Yes.
We talked then on the topic of a competitor that had 35 locations. But then again, he paused and said, "Why would I even want 35? I'm good at 2 because I feel like it's the type of business I want to run." The point, so the insight that we took away from this was so often we can become so blinded by the incorrect metrics, the quantifiable ones, which can turn into revenue and you lose track of why you did something. What actionable advice or steps can new practitioners take to make sure they're constantly prioritizing patient care over profit seeking?
So for me, the first thing is when a patient walks away, right? My thought is always, if I was that patient, would I take this information, actually apply it, and come back? Or was this the most expensive hangout of my life? Right? Because especially when you do couples therapy, for example, that's almost a $400 price tag, right? So I always tell people, this can be the most expensive hangout of your life. So make sure, one, that you're coming here is because you are actually ready to change. Because if not, with $400, you know what I could do? A lot, then go to therapy if I'm not ready for change, right? So I always look at my client and think about it that way. As they walk out, if everything I just gave them, would I, if I was them, actually listen to that, apply it, and still come back? So I always look at what changes or transformations based on what I said actually affects them. The words that I use, the way that I behave towards them, did they feel that I was being quite honest? Did they feel that I hurt them? One of the things that my patients always tell me is, Dayana, and I guess coming from the Bronx, I'm very direct. I'm very straightforward, right? Of course, I always err on the side of caution, but if you've been with me for a while, and I have one particular patient, she's been with me for a while. One day she came and she told me about something that happened, and she says, I don't understand why this keeps happening to me, right? And I'll give you the clean version. And I told her, listen, I said, there are things that are going to happen at times in our lives that are not our fault. And that's just the way life is. And there's other times because we made stupid decisions and we got to where we got to, and now we have to deal with the consequences of it. And that's where you're at. And she looked at me, she goes, God, I know. And you tell me this all the time. And I'm like, but if you know this, then why are we still here? She's like, that's why I keep coming, because I can't figure it out. Again, I gave you the clean version of that. The actual version is like, more, a little more colorful. And
yeah,
she
less
laughed.
diplomatic.
Yeah, less diplomatic and more colorful. But that's the main thing that I seek when we do therapy, is to tell you, to be honest with you, but also allow you to find your own solution and decide, okay, is this right for me? Because I could give you the best solutions and ideas in the world, but if you don't believe that, you're not going to go practice it anyway. So again, a real expensive hangout. So I always look at it from that. Did they get the service and the solutions that they needed? Because if they didn't, then I did fail at my job. And no matter what they pay me, that money will never justify that individual now not finding what they need. Because money doesn't buy you a peace of mind. It sure as hell doesn't for me.
As we've seen time and time again.
Yeah.
With that being said, if that's not the, what is the goal? What is for Dayana Romero? What future goals do you have for your practice or practices, and how do you plan on going about achieving them?
So my goal is, especially for me and myself, right? I can't speak on behalf of my husband or anybody else in the practice, just for myself. My goal is to continue, furthering my education in regards to, being a couples therapist, continuing to be able to help people understand the body, the body and the mind connection, because regardless of whatever therapy you do, that will always affect, when you're not in a good mental health, your physical state. So it's always being able to connect to that. And it's always making sure I have the proper support resources and networks to be able to connect people with that, because like my husband always says, if we can't do it for you, we will help you find someone who can, because again, I can't do everything. That's not what I'm trained in. I'm trained in one thing, the one thing I'm good at, and everything else I will find certified and qualified people who can help you with the rest while we continue to collaborate with them, because that's the key thing. And you said it earlier, silos, nobody works well in a silo. It's always about collaboration. And
I
so
love
those are
it.
my goals, is to continue in that aspect.
Nice. And one final question for you, Dana. You know, if you're, and again, we've talked about this, maybe it's been answered similarly, but if you had one takeaway out of everything, cutting it down to just that one thing, could you share one key takeaway that you believe all clinic owners should keep in mind for sustainable growth?
I think it's patient care. It will always come down to patient care. Again, you can have the greatest marketing in the world. You can have the greatest, SEOs and Googles, and you can have the greatest of yous, Tomas, and the greatest of the Dannys. But if people walk away feeling that I provided crappy patient care, then eventually, like Paul Mitchell says, everybody will buy it once, but nobody will come back. So my main thing is always my patient and my patient's well-being. Whether I get paid or not is never the focus for me. It's always, did that patient get what they need? And when they walked out of here, is that one more day of hope that things will get better? Or did that add on to them like, no, maybe life really isn't worth living? Because not every patient that I see is, happy-go-lucky. There are some that are severely depressed, severely anxious, and severely question whether or not, if they have anything worth, living for. So if I can give them that hope, patient care, and they can keep coming back until they realize they don't have to come back anymore because they've gotten to where they want to be, then I know I've done my job. So it always comes down to patient care, evidence-based, and that is actually our motto, evidence-based patient care. It has to be evidence-based. If there is no evidence to what we're practicing, then we don't allow it to be practiced in the practice.
I love that. Again, the engineer in me respects that. My background is biomedical engineering, and I think that's so. I'm always leaning towards that, and I think, yeah, personally for me, that sits well with my my own stance on how things should be done. So I love what you're doing. Really appreciate this. There's so many stories, lessons, and everything in your own story and your husband's, and I think it's very admirable in terms of how you've really taken your own unique strengths to create something beautiful that's helping a lot of people in a lot of different facets in their life. So on my end, I want to thank you for the work that you do for your patients and for having this conversation. And yeah, where can people find out more about what you do?
So again, like I said, we're located in Hamilton, Ontario, but people can definitely Google us at rdpsych.com. And there you can see, all the services that we provide, the practitioners. And if you are in Ontario, you can definitely make an appointment. If you are in another province, another country, or another state where psychotherapy is not regulated, then we are allowed to service you. But if you are in a place where psychotherapy, psychology is regulated, then you have to see a healthcare professional there.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks so much for everything.
You're welcome, Tomas. Thank you.
Bye. Do it again.